Hello, you're listening to the Robot Wars History podcast where we chart the development of the show and the British robot combat scene in general by looking at key teams and bots. I'm your host Luke, and with me today is Nick
Hello.
and TG.
Good morning, all.
And today we are covering Wild Thing.
Yeah, starting with Thing 2, gloss. The less said about Demon, the better. But as Nick pointed out before the call, the original Thing 2 was really inspired heavily by Demon's very successful Wedge, and they said, let's take that and make it better, and do that more. I am, of course, being sarcastic. For those of you who have forgotten Demon, I don't blame you at all. But the fact remains, the original Thing 2 was essentially a highly aggressive, highly optimized wedge bot with that high sort of ramp design that would be replicated a lot later on in robots like Heavy Metal, but not very commonly used, and I think surprisingly effective for its time.
Yeah, not your traditional wedge, as in you put a slight slant on a long box shape, but this is just
Your
a
roadblock wedge.
where its whole surface is the wedge. Essentially, it can go as high as you want up the wedge and fall off it, which we'll come to see helped in some instances in Series 3.
Yeah, and to look at another point is Wild Thing had a lot bigger wheels than most of the wedges. I mean, you have someone like Chaos 2, but really Chaos 2 was a flipper as much as it was a wedge, if not more so. It was a flipper. But Wild Thing was just a wedge, and it had these big, aggressive tyres that were able to give it so much push, whereas you look at Beast of Bodmin, or I'm trying to think of some other wedge bots from Series 3 that you can use as an example.
They were general four-wheel driven wedges.
Pusher wedges, like, slow. The Big Brother is another one. Your more ponderous wedges. So, and it was one of those things that it made it such an aggressive and quite effective combat robot. So, I suppose the first thing to talk about is how it goes in Series 3. Its main weapon is that lifting arm at the back of its wedge, but it's not really used that much. The wedge was really its point of attack. And as a result, it kind of bossed its heat just by running into robots until they ground down.
Wild Thing. Thing 2's lifter at the rear is considered its main weapon, but it's about as main weapon as Big Brother's Morning Star is. We know that the wedging at the front is going to be the main thing that beats opponents that have high ground clearance, and that's exactly what it proved to be in this case. First fight against Prize Fighter.
Yeah, Prize Fighter, with a great Shremek and effective looking robot for a first round knockout. Like, you look at all the robots that the semi-finalists of Series 3 beat in the first round, Prize Fighter's probably one of the better ones. And they have a really effective self ride at the start, but Wild Thing bosses them into the sidewalls, and that's really the end of the fight from there. Prize Fighter can't recover.
Yeah, this fight kind of shows the difference between a very, very well executed Series 3 wedge in Thing 2 and a less well executed Series 3 wedge in that it's floating off the ground in Prize Fighter's case. But as you said, Thing 2 takes this on its ground clearance, and that is what will take it to the semi-finals, basically.
Yeah, because it's and skipping ahead a little bit, it's very much the same with Cerberus. Where the ground clearance and the drive behind the wedge is what wins it in the heat final as well. So it's very, it finds a tactic that works for it, and it pulls it off.
Yeah, I mean, coming to what you mentioned earlier regarding what Thing 2 is very unconventional kind of wedge or rambot. It does come up against probably one of the better
four-wheel driven.
One of the better examples of that species in Alltalk, the four-wheel driven kind of plowbot. And Alltalk does have most of the battle because it's a more conventional design. It doesn't ride up like Thing 2, but once Shunt starts getting those Shunt axe blows in, it's all over.
Yeah, thing about that fight is Thing 2, you can see, struggles quite a bit to turn on the spot because, it's two-wheel driven and it's only supported by casters at the end, so naturally it's going to swerve about more and be more difficult to point towards the opponent. So, like, Nick Adams gets a good amount of praise for his driving in future series, but doesn't quite get enough in Series 3 when Thing 2 was really erratic, wasn't as precise, swerved around a lot, and that's where he kind of managed to still drive well enough to win fights like this, where all talk on paper is, as Luke said, the more conventional design that probably should have won the fight, but Thing 2 ground it down really well, and as we said, it then beat Cerberus, so it was a comfortable heat win from the upgraded Demon.
Yeah. And like, to not skip ahead over the fantastic name, like the Addams Family thing, like what a great idea. Like Demon is such a bland and generic name, but then to go from that to, thing, like, and Nick gets his kids involved, and obviously they're the Addams Family. They're like, hey, let's be the Addams Family thing.
Exactly.
Like, so underrated. So underrated.
It is. Like, you see
name.
Demon in Series 2, and it's just... The paint job's a nice yellow, but aside from that, it's a boring wedge. The team look boring as hell. And then they just do a complete 180 in Series 3, as you say, and try and add that bit of flair to their team, and takes them through in the future as well. A lot of people remember them and the team, so...
Yeah. I really like
the Smith family, or the Jones.
Yeah, I really actually always liked the Wild Thing costume. Like, it was really simple, but it was just like that pink or green on black.
Yeah,
and
it was
always
just black
very memorable.
shirts and then neon text. It was
Yeah.
always just eye-catching.
Always fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Series 3 semi-final, which I think might be probably the Thing team's most forgettable fight. Like, it's the one that I always forget about. I'm like, who knocked out Thing 2 in Series 3? But it was Panic Attack. Yeah, I always forget that this fight actually happened.
Yeah, the fight
like a
of the
weird
two
all-star
robots. Yeah, the fight of the two robots that are hard to drive in Series 3.
Yeah.
And of course it's decided by the Arena Spike, because it would be.
If only it was decided by the Thing 2 Spike, but unfortunately not.
Go imagine that. Uta
I mean,
with
yeah,
a spike.
it is unfortunate because up until then, Thing 2 definitely has the better of Panic Attack because, Panic Attack.
Yeah, no, that's right. Because I mean, considering Panic Attack, like, it'd be very easy to say, Panic Attack's too wide and too heavy to be beaten by a wedge, but it does lose to a wedge in the next fight. So obviously that one's a flipper. But I think it would be incorrect to say that, Thing 2 can't get Panic Attack over. I think that it could have. You look at the fight against All Talk, it could have done quite well there, and I think it was doing.
Well,
doing
yeah, I
fairly
mean, all
well.
it had to do was keep going at the rate it was, because as Luke said, it was doing a good job in the early stages of this fight, so
And I
it
think
was well on its way.
I think the way Nick Adams drives, it's very easy to give him aggression points, and that's something I'm going to touch on in Series 5 with the Prize Fighter fight, is that Wild Thing just looks aggressive when it's doing something as simple as driving around. It just looks like it's just fully having a go at you. It's kind of like a welterweight boxer who's just like darting around and ducking and dancing
against
and
such a
weaving.
wide wedge, the opponent has to kind of retreat to avoid going up it, so it just allows Nick Adams to chase even more, and as you say, it just naturally looks aggressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and specifically against Panic Attack, which is a bot that doesn't do well with very aggressive
Panic
right-on
Attack's
bots.
Panic Attack's length comes at its sides, whereas Wild Thing tries to have as aggressive a front as possible. But yeah, very interesting fight, and it's a shame we never got to see this happen again in the future.
Oh yeah, that would have been a very
great
interesting
little
fight
extreme
around
fight.
Series 5.
Yeah, Series 6 Wild Thing versus Series 6 Panic Attack. Would have loved it.
Okay, that less so. But, like, imagine if the All-Stars fights in Extreme, instead of having, I don't know, Panic Attack completely flipped over in 2 seconds by Firestorm, you give us a real good old control fight instead, but... I mean, Wild Thing didn't have a bad one, but we'll get to that.
Yeah. So that's it for Series 3. Series 4, they then update and they put probably the natural evolution of this design, which is putting a lifting arm for a Shreemekh, because they lost in Series 3 by being flipped onto their face. And so to add a self-riding arm was probably a pretty good idea.
and pretty crucially, they've got their smaller wheels. They're not as quick, but they've got a lot more control maneuverability, and also notably, they're not reaving up all the time when they charge in.
Yeah.
So now they are flush to the ground.
They've got better balance. Yeah. It's
They
interesting.
didn't really need the speed.
It's interesting that Nick Adams says that the machine wasn't sturdy enough. I find it very strange that he critiques his own robot. That's the critique that he makes. Because if I were to make a critique of Series 4 Wild Thing, it would certainly not be that it wasn't sturdy enough. But we'll come to that in a second.
Probably the most sturdy bot in the entire field.
Yeah. So I mean, the wheels look soft, but that didn't seem to hinder them. I'd say.
But they're big. The
Yeah.
tyres are big. They can take damage.
I would say that Series 4 Wild Thing is the least memorable of the 4 iterations. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's not. It's got the least
Design-wise.
flair of the
Design
others.
wise, it feels like it's in between
Yeah.
Thing 2 and Series 5 Wild Thing.
Yeah.
Even though it is,
Even though I think it's a
it is,
good
I'd
design,
argue the
like, I think it's a
best
great
designed
design.
one. It's
Yeah.
Yeah.
easily
And,
the best designed.
Yeah. I just think, it's the one that, and I think part of the reason for that is that it's got an extremely forgettable heat campaign. And Series 4, Series 4 had that slog of 3 or 4 heats towards the end of the arc, just before we got to Hypnodisc and maybe Panic Attack as well. But there was a slog of, Spawn of Scudder, Wild Thing, Mouse Trap. Like, those were the heats we were getting. It's just like, oh, can it be over yet?
Yeah, you could see where all the optimism with those, Steg 2 and Dominator 2 type heats went.
Yeah, that's the thing. They front loaded Series 4 so much, and really, this should have been in place of Tornado's heat, but they swapped it around because they wanted Gemini and Chaos 2 to fight. So, Wild Thing's heat should have been earlier on in the show,
Yeah.
sandwiched between 2 excellent heats in Dominator 2 and Thermidor 2. So. Interesting to see whether that would have helped its memorability, but nonetheless, it's not a whole lot to say about its heat campaign.
No,
Yeah.
it's Wild Thing against a bot with either good ground clearance it can exploit, or bots like Reactor, which are just big, slow, lumbering things, which Wild Thing is obviously going to dominate.
Yeah, if Reactor could turn at all, then Nick Adams' Shremek might have been worth adding for this series, this heat, but he didn't need to worry too much.
Yeah, the extent of the fight I remember with Reactor is that one shot of Wild Thing behind it, pushing it into the CPZ. That's really all there is to remember. Because I love Reactor 2. It's one of my favourite bots of that series, but the original Reactor I think was a little bit less good. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
I feel like the original Reactor is one of the only robots that Wild Thing's bludgeon a disc could have actually done some damage to if they had it 1 year earlier.
Yeah.
It's got big old wooden wheels. But anyway, yeah, and then Steel Avenger, it's a really nice pitting. I love that little and it gets tipped into the pit. That's fun. But that fight really boiled down to Steel Avenger doesn't have a Shremek and Wild Thing's an aggressive wedge bot with good ground clearance, so
Yeah.
it was
Steel
good
Avenger
as
is
far as it was
always a
gonna be.
good machine against the less refined robots, but the moment it faces a wedge like this, especially with a decent driver, what could you have asked of the Steel Avenger to try in this fight? It faced it twice. It faced it in the melee as well, and it was just as dominated.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not making a dent in that thick front end. So
I thought you were going to say Wild Thing's not making a dent in that thick polycarb. I was going to be like, calm down.
Hey, I just realised a fun little bit of trivia. Wild Thing and Steel Avenger would both go on to fight Chaos 2 in the following series, in the main series campaign.
There you go. The
That's
more you
I
know.
think I find that
similar
fun.
quality of fights.
Yeah. All right, well, let's talk about Exterminator, shall we? Who wants to?
Yeah, I
comment
mean,
on that?
well, I mean, Exterminator does make a good show of it, but
It's a better
really,
fight than I remember. It's one of those fights that I'm just like,
Yeah.
this is kind of a thing that happened.
the only takeaway I've really got from this is that Wild Thing it's a lot more nimble and it's more aggressive than Exterminator can really be.
Yeah, both machines have their moments. They're both fast. They can both lift and push. But as we mentioned about Nick Adams being a bit interesting with his comment on Wild Thing's durability, this is another fight where it takes no damage, and Exterminator gets its Shremek warped. Its hoop bar warped. Its armor warped. Its entire flipper warped.
That's one thing. That's one thing I wanna know. Is this the only time Wild Thing actually uses its flipping arm to flip over an opponent instead of just pure like drive?
Yeah, because I think Steel Avenger was just drive.
I mean, this was
just
kind of drive at the same time. Like, Nick Adams pulls off a really nice little turn on the spot to line it up. So it is mostly driving, but yeah, he then does try and use the lifting arm to say he got Exterminator over. A bit like Storm 2 acting like the lifting arm got the Uter on the Steel Avenger.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah.
God, imagine Wild Thing getting an Uter with its lifting arm. Jesus Christ.
God.
And it's Wild Thing trying to charge Exterminator out of the arena.
Oh gosh.
I just want to I wonder if the first time someone said, "Hey, we need a good thing for Craig Charles to say after this fight. How about Exterminator?
No.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. It's sold.
Yep.
Oh,
it's
God.
like, I can't believe I could never say that. I'd just be like, no, I'm not saying that. That's just too easy.
Like, what would have been the saying if the result was the other way round? Just like Wild Thinged. Like,
Yeah.
no, you don't go there.
Wild Thing, you don't make my heart sing.
Yeah. So.
I mean, I think I think the following fight against Hypnodisc, I think this is the first time we see something that will be quite the trend with Wild Thing, especially in the next series. Wild Thing is very good at being aggressive. It's well good at taking hits. It struggles, however, to really score hits. And when it's against something that can do damage or score points more flashily, like against a flip or whatever, Wild Thing is at a severe disadvantage, and especially here.
Yeah, certainly. As you say, it's kind of like a typical spinner versus defensive bot fight you'd see more in the modern day. Spinner starts strong, gets in loads of hits. The more defensive bot comes back and has a strong finishing spell, but yeah, Wild Thing just, as you say, damage, especially back then in Robot Wars, was so heavily weighted. It didn't really stand a chance unless Hypnodisc's spinner broke early on or Hypnodisc broke down, but in a general fight with no gremlins, it's not really going to have enough to win judging criteria, is it?
Yeah, I mean, as was said earlier, like, Nick being concerned that Wild Thing wasn't sturdy enough is pretty absurd here, because like it takes those hits and they are pretty ugly hits. Like
absolutely.
Side of the wedges.
There's like two or three times where Wild Thing. Yeah, there's like 2 or 3 times where Wild Thing just gets completely spun around on the spot because there's just such big hits. But the armor only peels up. It's not like He doesn't lose panels. He doesn't lose a wheel. It just kind of carves into Wild Thing, but it doesn't carve through it.
Imagine any other robot taking a hit directly on the wheel from Hypnodisc in series.
Yeah, just imagine. Just imagine. I mean, you can go all the way up to like Series 6 with Hypnodisc, and it was still killing robots by hitting them in wheel areas and stuff like that. So Wild Thing has exposed wheels, and it was just completely fine.
Well, it is bouncing a bit, but I mean...
Yeah, exactly. But that's kind of the whole idea behind the big tyres, isn't it? They won't come off in one. They can absorb some hits, and they can keep, as JP calls it, limping, I think he said. I mean, it was limping, but you know, it was like an aggressive limper, if you can make that a thing. Really good fight. Really really ahead of its time. Like, this is before the weight increase we're having a fight like this. The machine shouldn't really be this durable at this time, but
No.
you think we're like 2 series on from, I don't know, Ivanhoe versus Killdozer, and we're having this type of fight.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly
Quite
right.
ridiculous, really. But, yeah, Wild Thing's campaign kind of just comes to an end, and it's a massive shame that this UK Championship run just stops there after a performance against a robot which looked completely unstoppable in Series 4. But luckily for it, it gets to, if you say redeem, I more say get more punishment by being in the Celebrity Special with Shauna Lowry.
Yeah.
Good
A
grief.
name that has truly written itself in history through the ages.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that was the Celebrity Special discussed.
Yeah. And I think that was still too much detail spent on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Here's where I think personally, and you may agree, that things start to take a bit of a downward turn with the Wild Thing design. Obviously, they probably learned from the previous series that, okay, our big point isn't we can't score damage. That is a weak point in our bot. And we've got an extra 20 kilograms, so what do? You let's put on a disc.
Bludgeoner.
At a bludgeoner at the wrong angle.
It's
It's
a
12
bizarre,
kilograms.
it's a bizarre choice. Like, Wild Thing got it right in Series 4. It has a self-righting arm on the front, slash a arm that can pin down robots if necessary, and its entire success in Series 3, and even in parts in Series 4, was knocking robots over and pushing them around, because you have enough flat surface area to push them around with. So they might now try and add damage points, even though it doesn't exactly go successfully, but they've gone from having a massive flat surface to push everybody around to having to use their disc to push people around, which stops the disc moving anyway.
That's the thing. They completely nullify the key point of their bot, which was that they were really low to the ground.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
this
they're
will-
still low
this
to
will
the
cost-
ground, but they can't push as well.
Well, yeah, because they're low to the ground, but the second they get under anything, there's a big disc in the way.
Exactly. And you
You
think,
can't get
what,
under a...
what part
And
of
it's...
what part of a machine is now left exposed because you have the Shremek over the flat front surface? What is the other flat surface of the machine? At the back. So put a disc there.
Oh. I mean...
I don't know. I feel like Wild
feel
Thing
like
trying to
I'm just-
reverse into other robots would never go that well.
Maybe not, but if
No.
if it lifts a machine over against the sidewalls, it then might have a chance to use a disc. But like this way,
I mean,
You know what it
just
should have
isn't
done
good
is
at
it
all.
should have gone for the Maximus design, which is have the flywheel in the wedge. That would have been good.
Or have the or do whiplash
I mean-
from BattleBots and put it on the arm. Good grief.
I mean, I feel like if you want to do something with that extra 20 kilograms, you either make it, you either really beef up the front end armor just to make it a real like spinner killer, or you beef
Yeah,
up the lifting
yeah.
arm to some kind of flipper.
Like,
But-
Tornado goes on to prove that wedges, pure wedges, are viable, but Behemoth and Wild Thing, both from the weight increase, seem to think that they need to add some form of an ineffective weapon to get damage points from an ineffective weapon. I understand the logic, but it nullifies the machine's strength or doesn't use the weight increase to the best of its ability, as you say.
Yeah.
But luckily for it, it still has enough in the tank to give Dominator 2 a bit of a lesson in control at times.
Yeah,
its
and this is a
first,
fun. This is a
All-Stars
fun one
fight.
because this is one of those fights, along with probably Big Nipper Aftershock, and there may be others that we can name others, and if anyone else can think of some, stick them in comments. But if this was on paper as a fantasy fight, I feel like everybody would vote for Dominator 2, and they'd just be like, oh yeah, Dominator 2 will win this. But they don't win it. It's one of those ones that everyone would predict the wrong thing.
Well, yeah, you think of
Pretty,
like Dominator 2, the series prior, faced a steep flat wedge in Firestorm, and it used its axe to clamp down. So
Yeah.
it's going to do that again here, but now it doesn't have to face a flipper, so it should just be a Dominator 2 win, really. But it doesn't prove that way at all, as you say.
It's because of the big
I mean,
flywheel that
ironically-
you guys were just making fun of.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. Just after we've come that,
I mean,
into a
I'd
fight where
more-
the flywheel decides it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd more put emphasis on Dominator 2 missing virtually every axe attack it tried, but yeah, we'll give some credit to this spinner.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing, because like the flywheel kind of feels like the only thing that could score anyone any points. Because Dominator 2, when it does hit, it's not going to pierce that wedge, and Wild Thing's struggling to get underneath Dominator 2. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a period of Dominator 2's life where it's gone literally back-to-back fights where the Spikosaurus lost and then the Wild Thing lost. It's not fun for Dominator 2.
Is that like the only time in its history Dominator 2 lost back to back?
I think
I
so.
have no idea. It probably is.
Yeah, I'd
But-
say so.
But
well,
yeah.
Spikesaurus Pussycat. Oh no, wait, no, never mind. I'm a fool. Those are 5 other fights between that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of had to get to the Annihilator final.
It just subbed in at the last second. Oh, the
just
the
lost
actual
every
finalists had to
fight.
pull out. So Dominator 2, you can fight in the final.
Yeah, Spirit of Nightmare had to pull out or something, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, really nice little fight. And it isn't made up to be like this, because it's a fight between two really good semi-finalist caliber machines, but it's
Like,
not
on
hyped
par,
up that
like,
much.
I would
Yeah,
say
exactly.
Dominator 2 and Wild Thing are as close to being on par as any two All-Stars have ever really got. Because Dominator 2
Yeah,
obviously had
consistent.
more consistent success, but Wild Thing had more success because they
Has a
they
bit more
reached more,
history.
it's had more history, and it actually won between the two. I don't really know. Perhaps Firestorm and Hypnodisc are the next best comparison, but like robots that are very much just on par in terms of their success.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. As you say, they're both machines that have interesting, if slightly unorthodox designs when you get to their like latest incarnations after the weight increase. But
Like
they
I've
both
always said,
manage to edge out heat wins.
Yeah,
They
I've
both
always-
struggle in heats, but get through them.
yeah, I've always named them
Yeah.
the B pluses, which is a bit unfair, I think, especially on these two. But like they're the B
Yeah.
pluses with S3 and Spawn again are usually the other two that are in that category.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They were never
I
good
dispute
enough
Spawn
to-
again, but-
No, see, I always just think they're a trio: Dominator, Spawn, and Wild Thing.
For the stage.
yeah, they're the
they
long-standing
make,
like
Yeah.
semi-finalists.
And then
Yeah.
S3's
They're
just
just
like,
they
I've
just
been here
round
for
out-
2 series.
Yeah, they round out the lineup. They're just like, so we need some semi-finalists. So we've got, this year it's going to be Razor, Bigger Brothers, the comeback story. We have got the big money makers like Chaos and Hypnodisc, and oh my god, I can't be bothered. So let's just, who else can we get to be in the semi-finals? Get all,
So,
get
yeah,
all those guys
Seed
again.
Dominator, Seed Wild Thing,
Yeah.
Seed Spawn again.
Yeah.
S3 did alright, Seed that.
All those guys. Let's just get all those guys back every year.
Yeah, and then next year we'll seed Ming Dynasty. That'll do nicely.
All right. So yeah, that's obviously the other fight to discuss in Extreme 1 is the Mayhem, in which Wild Thing is the only semi-finalist not to make the Annihilator. So what I mean is, it's the only. All 6 of the Mayhems had a semi-finalist, and all 5 of the others were won by that semi-finalist. Wild Thing was up against Fluffy and Arnold A. Terminator, and actually was the loser.
It's very surprising on paper because Fluffy's a newcomer and Arnold's a round 2 dropout. And
Yeah.
Fluffy is very quickly.
I mean,
out
after
of the
series-
fight.
After Series 5, I would have picked Fluffy to be the winner, followed by Wild Thing, followed by Arnold A. Not knowing anything about Series 5, I still would have probably said Wild Thing's the best, probably followed by Fluffy, just on looks. So, yeah, surprising. But good on them. Like, I love Arnold A winning
to be-
this fight.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think Wild Thing probably could have taken this. I mean, it
It's one of
handles
those fights,
Fluffy
though,
without
isn't it?
much
Where
trouble.
yeah, it definitely did, and that essentially counts for a KO to it. But again, it's one of those fights where if it had space for a machine to run up its wedge Arnold A would have fallen over more, but instead it didn't need to force it to self-right, so Arnold could get in lifts of its own, and that probably just about did enough. But who can tell? We saw, what, like a minute and a half of them two actually fighting, and then it was just Fluffy being flipped and chucked and immobilized and counted out, and you can't really say this is a bad or good judge's decision, because there's not much there to say.
Just based off, just based off of the TV edit, I think it really does just come down to that one shot of Arnold overturning Wild Thing and Wild Thing.
And it's a shame, because you want to kind of have a fight like this be more action-packed with what we see in the edit, because it's a big moment, it's a shock. It's an all-star not reaching the Annihilator itself, as TG said, but it's kind of just a little bit condensed, and it doesn't make the fight sour, but it could have been improved in how it was presented to us, I think.
Yeah. Wild Thing would have been an interesting one to have that in that Annihilator. I think they could have taken that, probably.
Yeah,
maybe.
Wild Thing is like the typical Annihilator robot, and it wasn't ever in one.
I mean, interesting. Imagine if it came down to them versus Pussycat.
That could either be interesting.
Such a fun fight.
In the sense of
that would be
Yeah, that would have been really good.
I've got the feeling that's either interesting or it turns out really bad, like Pussycat just hitting the disc and it's not doing any damage to either of them or something.
Yeah, no, but I feel like they're both such aggressive drivers. Pussycat would be going for wheels, and Wild Thing would just be like bossing them around. I reckon that's low key one of the best fights we never really got that we could.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Definitely.
And
definitely
even then, like, take Arnold out of the Annihilator, not much changes. Exterminator and Thermidor still break down early on. Hypnodisc is still having troubles, but it's really comes down to how it fares against Splinter and Pussycat, and I think it's aggressive enough to beat Splinter.
Yeah, I mean, Splinter just lost that because Pussycat ended up sniping its back, so I can't really see that changing too much. But yeah, it would have been an interesting fight between All-Stars, but Wild Thing still did get another fight against an All-Star in the second round of the All-Stars against Firestorm.
Oh yeah,
3.
we completely skipped over that part, didn't we?
Yeah, no problem. It was the Mayhem was one of the early shown episodes, wasn't it? So you got to give it some limelight. But
I think there's more to talk
Firestorm,
around the Mayhem anyhow.
Yeah, there is. Like, this Firestorm fight it's a really interesting one because it's a pretty good fight, but it seems to have the reputation of Wild Thing absolutely dominating for the opening minute or so, when really it's just both machines not getting to grips with each other rather than Wild Thing dominating. But I guess that's the thing when you have a wedge bot or a defensive bot against a flipper. If the flipper doesn't get a flip in, it'll be considered ineffective, even if the control bot itself doesn't do much. So
yeah, I mean, both bots can get under each other, but Firestorm can do so much more when it gets under something.
yeah, and it's one of the fights where Wild Thing's spinner doesn't actually impede it, because Wild Thing gets stuck right up on top of that lifting arm somehow. But
And like, you've got to. You mentioned before about how it would have been good to get a Panic Attack Wild Thing reunion. Well, we almost did. This would have been it, but Panic Attack lost.
yeah, exactly. Oh my god. Firestorm ruining everything as always, eh?
I'm just imagining now. Imagine, we could have gotten Firestorm Dominator 2 rematch, Wild Thing versus Panic Attack. Oh, imagine that.
Oh, that's a shame. I'm sad now. Cheers, Luke. Cheers, TG.
Only other fight in Extreme really is against Tornado, and this is just your average Tornado domination.
Yeah, the fights we did see it have in Extreme against All Stars, apart from the Dominator 2 fight, were mostly kind of fights that wouldn't be as good as fights we could have got against other All Stars, which was a bit of a shame. It's like you need to do a Wild Thing fantasy tournament for fights against All Stars that it never had.
Wild Thing versus every semi-finalist in post-weight increase.
Wild Thing versus, I don't know, St. Aggro. That would be great. But,
Still be better than Firestorm versus Panic Attack, so...
yeah. But yeah, this Tornado fight, it's It's a bit like the All-Talk fight, shall we say, but this time All-Talk is a machine that doesn't break down unless you have recoil involved. So
Yeah.
in this case, Tornado
Recoil
really
of,
bossed it.
Would you like to recoil that comment?
No, I think my Skype will cut out
Just
if I
let
do.
us-
So,
I just want
better
to
not.
point out one thing. We're comparing two kind of battle of the small spinners. Tornadoes legitimately does more damage here, which says all you need to know about Wild Thing's spinner. I think.
Yeah, and I think it shows that Wild Things having this big bludgeoning flywheel didn't actually help it much because it just seems to get jostled so much more than when it was optimized
Well,
wedge of Series
exactly.
3,
It
4.
just
Plus,
it has more head-on collisions where it's just kind of like a dead heat of a push against each other, but
Feels like
Yeah,
the
and
torque
you're not
is
going to
just
win. You're not going to win a
hindering it.
head-to-head push with Tornado. If you can get it up the wedge a bit, you might, but if it's just locked on, you're not going to win.
yeah, because if that wheel wasn't there, then it's more likely Tornado will just ride up the wedge. But no, it's got this big thing to push against. So
Exactly,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
really a good point. If Tornado ran up the wedge onto the Wild Thing's wedge, it probably would have been a closer fight for Wild Thing. But yeah, you're right. It gives it something to
Exactly.
push back on.
If Tornado doesn't need to be worried about going head-to-head with a wedge, then it kind of shows how ineffective your wedge is in certain instances.
I'm just watching the fight again now. I think be careful when you test damage to Tornado because there's a lot of damage to Wild Thing going into this fight. It must be carryovers from other fights,
Yeah.
like
I'm
whether
not
that's
quite sure
Dominator
what,
2.
maybe
but-
I think it's most. I think it's most. It might just be that I saw a few sparks, but that's still
Its
not
wedge
all
is
Wild
its
Thing's
wedge
doing,
is
so-
already its wedge is already scuffed and it's got a big hole at the top, which I presume is
Maybe
from Dominator
this
2,
fight was
but-
filmed after the losers melee in Extreme
Oh
5
yeah,
in Series
S3.
5.
There you go. Yeah, well, God knows Tornado had enough time on its hands in Series 5.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. All right, so that's it for there. So Series 5, a couple of well-loved fights against Trouble and Strife, which I think people remember as better than it is. It's not great, but it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I think Wild Thing's, I think one thing that helps Wild Thing here is Trouble and Strife has absolutely no drive. Like it
Yeah.
can barely move. If it could,
I mean,
if it could, yeah.
It's pretty interesting to see a competitive first round loser here, but as you say, you do kind of need to drive around a bit to beat Wild Things, so.
Well, Wild,
Yeah,
Thing, gets,
and-
'cause I
Wild
mean,
Thing gets a competent first round loser in odd numbered series. So
Yeah.
in Series 4 it gets Humphrey, in Series 6 it gets I don't remember, is it like Infinity? No, that's Wild Things. That's
They,
259.
the UFO,
The
Series
Stag.
6 UFO.
The Stag and UFO. And so Series 3 they get Prize Fighter, who's good on paper, and Trouble and Strife, who's good on paper. So
It just would have faced Gravity in Series 7, wouldn't it?
yeah,
Gravity
that's
or
right.
Tough as Nails.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a fight where Wild Thing's durability pays off because it's able to kind of go right into Trouble and Strife and just kind of grind it down, even though the disc is like taking chunks out of the front. They're able to just shrug that off and
Yeah.
still dictate the fight because they can easily get the better of something as slow and cumbersome as Trouble and Strife.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
this is basically the Hypnodisc fight if Hypnodisc didn't move. You can beat a robot on judging criteria if your opponent literally can't be controlling or move towards you or
Yeah.
whatever. Like, Trouble and Strife gets all the damage points pretty much, unless you count Matilda's flywheel hit at the end, but
Yeah. But that's only
You
because Wild
normally
Thing is
don't.
constantly driving into its disc.
exactly, yeah.
And its flipper. Like, literally, Trouble and Strife doesn't execute an attack. Wild Thing just attacks it and gets flipped, but not flipped over. And it's
Yeah,
clever.
that's
little
the
spear-
benefits of a flat wedge that doesn't have a weapon in the way of it. You can actually ride up it and get attacked.
The little spear on the Stream Mech arm is actually very good for balance. It's kind of like that Eruption or Spawn Again design where they're like, they have that wedged back so that you flip into them and then you tip back onto your wheels. I said
Yeah,
Spawn Again, but I
as
think
opposed
it's
to
Spawn
getting
Again.
like beached.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's supposed to be getting beached. which is kind of funny because Wild Thing does get beached on its side a little bit, but not.
Yeah.
But it never gets beached on its back, which is good.
Yeah, sets up an absolutely amazing second round battle.
Oh yeah.
The war of the woman, shall we say? Isabel versus the Napalm Girls.
It's not to be taken lightly that there are semi-finalists fighting in round 2. Like, that's a big deal.
Yeah,
Former
true All Stars
semi-finalists.
fight. Screw the Wild Thing versus Pussycat fight. This is the semi-finalists fight we wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, move over Atomic and Hypnodisc are no longer the most controversial draw in Series 5 round 2. This is horrendous. This should have been... Napalm should have been given the honour of fighting Prize Fighter so they can get to the semi-final.
Oh my god, imagine. But yeah, Nick Adams, again, he has fights where I can use the disc on the wedge as like slander against him, but he proves me wrong here because he faces a robot without a weapon on the wedge and he beats it. So very, very comfortable. Outdrives a very nimble machine here.
Yep, and those axes, like, it beat Dominator 2, beat Napalm as well.
Yeah, I don't think the mandible was quite at full power, but after it had a stressful fight against Warhog, you can understand battle damage carrying over.
I just love that you see the flywheel actually do damage against Napalm. It just like gets dug into its backside and it's just like tearing it up. It's like Splinter levels of damage. It's just tearing the metal out of place. I'm like, what is this? What universe?
There's a really loud hum throughout this fight, and I thought for a while it was like Wild Thing's discs, like of all the things to have a death hum, until I realised it was just Napalm's motors.
I think it's just the death hum of
Anyway.
Napalm.
Yeah, just the death of Napalm internally.
I'm just pleased that they were able to
it's-
pit Napalm, because if this was in Series 10, it'd be like, Napalm is not moving. Let's put them in the pit. Let's have a
Just
fog of
park
war
them.
instead.
Park them next to the pit, go for the pit button, and then JP's like, oh, we got fog of war, can Napalm get its axe up to speed?
Yeah, who knows what's happening? Where's Napalm? Ah, they're still next to the pit, because they can't move.
Oh, Christ. Roguehouse Robot, they go after Wild Thing instead.
Fights like this that made me just love the pit release button, because thank heavens.
Absolutely.
Thank heavens for the pit
Absolutely.
release button. Anyway, let's talk about the Heat final, which is the Vengeance.
Oh my god.
Oh, yeah, rematch
I always
alert.
forget that. I always
Yeah.
forget that this is a Vengeance.
Prize Fighter MACH.
I mean, of all the rematches you'd expect for in a Series 5 like Heat final, I don't think you'd expect this.
Not
Yeah,
quite.
I was holding out for a Wild Thing Fighting Talk or Hippopotamus rematch if we're looking at Series 3 rematches.
Oh dear. And then Hippopotamus wins the judge's decision because it's against Wild Thing.
Yep. That was the wrong mayhem, wasn't it? Because I tell you what, if they had been the same Annihilator, that would
Oh
have been
my
hilarious. But no,
Absolutely.
they're different ones. And then like,
Don't think I could.
If only
don't
they
think I
could- if
stand
only they
watching
could have
Wild
run into
Things spin a
Cerberus
fail to
somewhere.
do damage.
because Cerberus was only in tag teams, so they couldn't have run into Cerberus. But gee, it would have been funny if they'd. Hang on, I'm just going to quickly let's calculate how many fights Hippopotamus would have had to win before it ran into Hypnodisc, before it ran into Wild Thing in Series 5. Hold on. It would have had to win its heat because it replaces S3, and so then it would have lost to Bigger Brother, and then it would have been in the losers melee. There you go, Hippopotamus in the losers melee with Wild Thing.
Wow.
I'm still just interested to know how it gets out of its heat.
Oh wow, you've got to just I'm sure that in Series 9, with those judges, they would have probably looked at the crying kids and said, yes, you were more
So-
aggressive.
So Killalot dumps Stinger out of the arena when it grabs it at the end. General
Scores a
Carnage 2
lucky
breaks
overhead
down
hit on the
again.
S3 aerial.
Well, genuinely, General Carnage 2 broke down from its own flipper usage, so it wins that. And then, yeah, it swings its arm and cuts off S3's aerial in the Heat final, so easy street, really.
General Carnage takes off its flipper and replaces it with the grabber because they think, hey, a grabber will work against Fighting Talk. That's how.
Oh dear. And then we see the General Carnage 2, that famous man going off for a sulk and being an internet sensation. Yeah.
Yep. Hey, and
Beautiful.
then you know what happens? Hippopotamus beats Wild Thing in the losers melee and has a rematch with Razor as well, because All Talk also fought Razor in Series 3.
Ah,
Oh my god.
This is just an alternate history. If only, Hippopotamus could have done better. Anyway, we digress. Back to Prize Fighter.
yeah, back to Prize
This is
Fighter,
a
which is
very
actually
much-
quite a good fight.
It's a very much a hot tap, cold tap kind of fight where one's clearly on top at the start and the other is clearly on top at the end. And it's just, which one do you give more weight to?
Yeah, I think they ultimately made the right decision, because I think probably for the, I don't know, maybe there might have been footage left on the cutting room floor of more Wild Thing with a barely moving prize fighter, because why would you
Yeah,
put
absolutely.
that
I
on TV?
mean, we see, I don't know, maybe 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes of this fight or something like that. And you think fights are 5 minutes. What are they going to cut out, as you say, Luke? They're going to cut out pushes and general drives, but those are going to still be important factors in the judge's decision. And if it's done for long enough, it's going to get even more weight than, admittedly, what was the more dominant spell visually from Prize Fighters Flips.
And there's a big period where Wild Thing's stuck on its side as well.
Yeah,
But it's clearly not
absolutely.
immobile. Like, it's
Well,
actually
that's the
spinning
thing.
around. And for
It's-
me, my interpretation is Prize Fighter was scoring more points at the start than Wild Thing was, but at the end, Wild Thing was scoring points and Prize Fighter was scoring no points. That's
Oh
what-
yeah, it was just absolutely getting bossed around at the end, as you
like,
say.
Prize Fighter has nothing that it can point to. Whereas at least at the start, Wild Thing's self-riding, Wild Thing's going for attacks, it's just being flipped. At the end, Prize Fighter's got nothing to say for itself. It's just like, oh yeah, I sat there and got pushed
Yeah.
around.
Exactly, and although Prize Fighter did have the most close to a KO attack when Wild Thing's beached, you're still not going to get extra points for Wild Thing not getting back down onto the arena floor. Like, that's just a moment, a period where neither machine are getting points. If anything, Wild Thing gets style points for coming back down somehow. But Prize Fighter can't get any for leaving a machine on its side, so... Yeah, closest to the KO maybe, but... It's a very, very close one.
And speaking of very, very close ones, let's talk about Chaos 2.
Who
Close
bought
in
it
a very
left?
different...
Who bought it left?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Very
a close
different
call
way.
again, yeah.
yeah. Because, it was ultimately a judge's decision as well. It would have been very interesting to see... I think Chaos 2 would still have won it, but in Series 3 or 4, where Wild Thing's wedge was a little bit more optimised, whether Chaos 2 would have broken the ground clearance so much more often as they do in Series 5. But
Yeah, I mean, when Wild Thing makes one of its drives towards the pit, Chaos 2 would probably be completely taken off the floor and then just slipped into the pit, as opposed to, like, being pushed by its own tyres across the arena floor, so...
yeah.
You know,
I mean,
Wild
to
Thing
be,
could have got a pitting.
I mean, yeah, and although to be fair, at least one of those drives, it's really the arm that's getting in the way. It's
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
sticking into Chaos 2.
They should have put the disc on top, there you go, wouldn't have had as much reach.
And here's
Pitting would
another...
have been achieved.
It's funny, here's another point of comparison between Chaos 2 and... between Wild Thing and Dominator 2. They both give really good fights against Hypnodisc and Chaos 2. Obviously not the Series 5 Dominator 2 fight with Hypnodisc, but like...
Yeah, I
they
was gonna
both,
say.
They both hold... Like, Dominator 2 is able to beat both of those robots in its career, and Wild Thing's able to give them both really, really close
Yeah.
losses in its career. Like, they're both able to go toe-to-toe with giants, is the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what sets them
yeah.
apart from robots like, 13 Black and, other semi-finalists who aren't quite at the Wild Thing Dominator level, but
Yeah.
they never really got the success of, like, a Pussycat or a Bigger Brother.
Yeah, they never had quite a kind enough run where they could have just sneaked through to a grand final or something
Yeah.
against a more viable opponent. They always had to face the big boys, and it's kind of like one of those things where it's great for them to prove they're such durable machines that can face such good opponents, as you say, but at the end of the day, they don't quite ever really have enough to get through, and it stops them ever making that step to saying that they're pretty much borderline elite, which is a shame.
Yeah.
But we still get one of the
I
best
mean,
fights of all time here, so not too much to cry about.
yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a contrast between it, this and the previous fight. Both of them are flippers. Both of them are weapons that can disrupt Wild Thing. But whereas Prize Fighter is just kind of a weapon bolted onto a kind of mediocre machine, Chaos 2's got it's got lasting power in this fight surprisingly, and it's about if Nick Adams wants someone who can match him on aggression, George Francis absolutely can. So that's why Wild Thing wins the previous one, and loses this one.
Yeah, and it is considered a close judge's decision by quite a few people, but the reality is it's a bit like the Heat final in a way, where Wild Thing gets close to the KO just as Prize Fighter did, but you don't get points for nearly pitting someone. Like the drive itself is aggressive and good control, but it could have pushed it near and around the pit and got the same amount of points as opposed to putting it right nearly in the pit. It doesn't give you any more points just because you nearly won the fight.
Yeah.
And in a general sense, Chaos 2 dominated the rest of it, so...
Yeah, apart from that, the fight is mostly just Wild Thing
Just
bouncing
flips.
off the arena walls.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And that takes it through to the losers melee against Spawn again and S3.
Yeah.
And I think this fight is very, very important in understanding the pretty radical change Wild Thing takes in the next series. Because, Spawn again's a non-factor in this fight, but S3, it's kind of a good shape for Wild Thing because it's the best shape for a spinner nearly that Wild Thing could face in many ways.
Yeah,
It's got these big, wide open sides, and
it's one of those things, though, isn't it, where it's a good design to push because it's so wide, but at the same time, you kind of have to get around a vertical spinner that's protruding more than anything else out of the machine to get to the wheels and the wheel shaft themselves. So that's kind of why Wild Thing does take quite a bit of damage at points in this fight, but... Yeah, it's nice to actually see Wild Thing in another fight after one of the best fights of all time, unlike in Series 4 in the main competition, so that's something.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's... Where do we stand on this judge's decision? Because the Chaos 2 one isn't really close, but this one is condensed in the TV edit, and it looks pretty much breakneck even.
a Wild Thing earns every control and aggression point it got. I think it could control them there. I think what swings it for S3 is not only does Wild Thing look like it'd been taken to the fucking cleaners at the end of this, but also S3 killed Spawn. I think that's basically what.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
and that's the thing. In a comparison between the two, you've got to take that into account.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that damage. Remember that damage I was talking about in the tornado fight? I think it was from S3. I'm looking at it here. It makes the most sense. But yeah, look, it just that bludgeon a disc. It's not a viable weapon. It's so hard to get, that into play against something like S3. S3 is all about its weapon. It's literally, it runs into you and its weapon's doing damage. Whereas Wild Thing, it has to really damage like napalm.
Well, yeah, and it's the fact that Jonathan Pierce tries to hype it up in every single fight as well, saying, I don't know, it's like 50,000 RPM or something ridiculous. It's like it might get up to 50,000 RPMs for 1 second, then it just burns out and doesn't move again for the rest of the fight.
Yeah.
I mean, fundamentally, it's at a horrible angle.
Oh, absolutely.
If Hypnodisc
like
was
Rhino
at that angle, it'd be getting bossed by. Yeah. That's a quick aside though. Do you reckon Wild Thing having the bludgeoner against if they came up against Hypnodisc again, do you think that could help absorb some hits?
No, I think it would get ripped off, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't think it would have helped them at all. Not in Series 5 Hypnodisc, no.
Because Hypnodisc got carried by Wild Thing on the wedge a couple of times as well, so you
exactly,
just
that actually helped it more.
Yeah, you're just going to see Wild Thing spinning on the spot about 100 more times.
But yeah, no, I think it could have gone either way, and I don't know whether we would have wanted to see Wild Thing versus Razor in the
Razor,
next
yeah.
round. I don't know how much fun that would have been.
Yeah, I mean the
It'd be, I mean, it'd be about
the S3 Razor fight was hardly fun in itself.
Yeah.
probably just it'd just be Razor like just chomping into the disc.
Well, it's just flat enough for Razor to attack, isn't it? Like Wild Thing. I mean, I wouldn't rule it out that Wild Thing's disc actually just snipes the wheel and locks it in place like Pussycat did, but you know.
Razor gets him up on the wedge, closes him, and then the bludgeoner just chops the tip of the claw off.
Yeah.
We get
Soldier
a
Ant-esque there.
Woo.
Fantastic.
But no, like I was saying, I think the thing they took away from this is that I think Nick Adams must have thought like Wild Thing is a bit too susceptible to taking damage, and that kind of he became obsessed with that, because the next Wild Thing in Series 6 is, if you want to give it one praise, it's certainly sturdy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a shame that's the only thing it is.
He kind of just takes a really compact machine and then, to try and make sure it doesn't take much visible damage at all, he just layers it in like sheets of polycarb as well. And you can see how much that comes to be affected in the future, but no, it stays in place quite well, doesn't it, this Wild Thing? Too bad the weapon itself
Everything about it.
Wow.
That isn't bad.
Is the weapon even less effective than in Series 5 and Extreme?
That's a good point. I mean, yeah, the thing about Series 6 Wild Thing is it's good at taking on spinners because it can take all those hits, but you put this up against anything that's got a flipper or any kind of wedge and it's doomed.
Exactly. Thankfully.
Would you say that Wild Things 2's melee is one of the most forgettable in Series 6?
Absolutely, yeah.
I literally couldn't even remember. Earlier in this podcast, I couldn't even remember who it fought.
I don't think it's bad, but it's definitely forgettable.
Yeah.
Like Vader is the big cheese in this melee, and it doesn't really do anything itself. Really, I think it snipes one of the Stag's tires. It might get both.
Yeah,
of
it gets
them,
a few nice hits in on Stag, and then kind of like peters out from there.
And
no one's covering themselves in glory.
Everyone just chases bloody UFO around for the next 3 minutes, and nothing really happens bar the Stag having like its chicken mascot decapitated by Sakil a lot nearly.
I mean, one thing I want to note really quickly. Apparently, Nick Adams was planning on making this version of Wild Thing a horizontal, and I just dread to think if he'd used the Series 5 disc as the horizontal.
Oh no.
Yeah, imagine.
Good grief. But yeah, it's a shame with this design. It loses that entire Wild Thing personality about it as well.
Yeah, it does. Because it's a completely different robot. And it's like one of those... This and Panic Attack Gold are like the ones where it's like, ugh, stop upgrading, go back.
Yeah. It just goes from cool flame decal and a black paint job with flames over it to this awkward red with like speed stripes on the side, and it's kind of Wild Thing colours, but it's like murky. It's boring.
Yeah,
it's bland.
You know what the green and purple reminds me of? It reminds me of like
it's functional. That's the problem.
Kind of jungly design for like a kid's like plaything or whatever.
Yeah. It's like a block. It's a block in a play area. I don't know how we've come to that conclusion, but yeah, it's like it's a £12 kids play set action figure. There you go.
It's a cheap red and black flannel shirt made into a robot. That's what it reminds me of.
That'll do nicely. Oh dear.
It also doesn't have demon eyes on it. Like that's the whole thing. All the Wild Things have had like eyes, and it's been like a little creature. But this is just kind of like an arrowhead.
The weird thing about their fight with 259 is it kind of shows simultaneously the best aspects of this design and the worst in the same fight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the combo they survive against 259, like my god.
You could just watch that GIF on repeat, couldn't you?
Oh Yeah, I mean, the one day when Sabretooth takes a combo like that, it's like done.
Fight's over.
It's over.
Yeah.
Stop!
Yeah, stop.
But here,
Exactly.
Nick Adams is just like, more.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. We probably, and it's funny. I think the reboots probably helped raise Wild Thing 2 in my eyes because, you know, in the reboot, not only is the fight over, it's actually all the subsequent fights are over because it's
Yeah.
just over. It's like that. It's done. Whereas this one, it's all this delightful looking damage, but it's all not that much damage.
Yeah, it's great
looks good.
visual stuff where Wild Thing is flying about the place, but most of it's just repairable, really. Internally, it's fine. It never slows down, and it just keeps
Yeah, because I
trucking.
mean, the thing about a vertical's been like 259. All it's going to hit are those big, thick, like structural steel or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh god! Imagine 259 in the reboots round Robin. Good grief, be absolutely destroyed.
No, but like imagine seriously, only other robot I could see taking a beating like this is, I don't know, Dominator 2 maybe in series.
Tornado.
Dominator 2, bigger brother.
Yeah.
But yeah, to be chucked around like that, no other machine will because Wild Thing's so compact in this version.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's actually
Yeah.
part of the appeal is that Wild Thing does get chucked around. Whereas if it was the same but it wasn't being thrown around, it wouldn't have been nearly as fun.
Yeah.
And like literally, Wild Thing immobilizes 259 by taking a hit, and Wild Thing again 259 just knocks its own belts off.
Yeah. Certainly does.
But yeah, what I was saying about it also showing its weakness is for a good while after 259 loses the disc, it's winning this fight as a wedge by using its like side and back
Yeah,
wedges,
it is.
Yeah.
which shouldn't be happening.
I mean,
It
259's a
shouldn't. If
better
it-
wedge than Corporal Punishment. That's pretty disgraceful, but
It's a better wedge than Series 5 Wild Thing, to be honest.
Ha!
yeah, that's pretty disgraceful as well. But it's
Not
true.
it's not until they drive onto their own belt, really, that Wild Thing's able to take this.
Yeah.
But they do take it, and they go on to fight Vader, and this is also a decent display from Wild Thing, I'd say.
Oh, it's a bit of a bore.
Yeah,
It's
and
a
I've
bit of
never.
a boring fight.
I don't
It
think I've
is.
ever watched this fight in
Undoubtedly.
sufficient detail.
It's just Wild Thing's weapon actually penetrates something, and then they're locked together.
Yeah, and it's like nothing Vader can do is going to make us wish that 259 wasn't here instead.
No. Why didn't Vader learn from 259 and use its back? It's got a wedged back as well.
It's got a wedge back about as effective as Demon.
So that could outwedge
Yeah, I mean,
Wild Thing
if-
as well.
If Wild Thing was, if Wild
Hang on,
Thing
hang on,
survived-
stop. It's battling its inner demons. There you go.
Oh,
Hey.
there we go. Well done.
I mean, if Wild Thing could survive 259, Vader's like thin cutter isn't going to do the work here.
I think Vader's cutter's a bit better to deal with it. It's more like an S3 kind of blade, but the problem is it gets stuck. It's probably more.
Oh, yeah,
it's more damaging, and that actually hinders it because they
Yeah,
get
'cause it
pinned,
will-
and that
it
doesn't
will
help it. Whereas
penetrate.
259's like multiple glancing blows probably look better for aggression.
Yeah, 259 kind of just has smaller teeth. It shatters more. But as you say, Vader just gets dug in and stuck, and that hurts it itself because Wild Thing also gets dug in and stuck, but can push more.
Yeah. And like
Yeah.
in Series 6, there was that roster of robots we all wanted to do really well. And it was usually at the expense of the old faces semi-finalists. Like, Terahertz did it, but Supernova couldn't get over Spawn again, and Hydra couldn't get over Dominator 2. And Vader is not the one that people talk about with Wild Thing. 259 is, because really,
Yeah.
it's just... Once Wild Thing had beaten 259, there was no suspense in this. They're like, well, Vader's not going to do it. If 259 couldn't.
Yeah, it certainly did feel that
Yeah.
way.
This fight really did feel like a formality.
Craig has a masterful quote here, though. Yes.
Is it Exterminator exterminated?
No, he asked Nick, like, how many times have you been to a judge's decision? Which, yeah, true.
Let's check that. I'm interested.
It's interesting. Is
Oh,
it like
God, I
is it like 4, 5?
I think it's more than that.
It's gotta be, surely.
It didn't have any in Series 3. It had one in Series 4. Oh,
The
it had the
answer?
Dominator 2 one.
It's 13
What, 13
Jeez.
judges' decisions?
in its career. Yeah.
Are you shitting me?
Nah.
What, did it just like face Hypnodisc 5 more times?
So, Reactor was a judge's decision.
Oh, for God's sake!
Uh,
Reactor! Oh!
So, yeah, Reactor, Hypnodisc,
Alright, yeah.
Dominator 2, The
Arnold
Mayhem,
A. Yeah,
Tornado.
Here we go.
Trouble and Strife, Prize Fighter, MACH2, Chaos 2, The Losers Melee, and then
Christ's
all
sake.
three of its Series 6 all three of its Series 6 heat fights.
Yeah, the melee as
And
well,
the Losers Melee. So the only fight that is in Series 6 that's not a judge's decision is the Razor loss.
Wow, he was immobilised in the Losers Melee in Series 6.
Yeah,
Well,
that's not
true.
a judge's
Okay, yeah,
decision.
true.
I don't think
Don't count that one.
But still,
the
that
judges
is-
have
That's still
given it
12.
to Wild
By
Thing.
4.
Yeah. But yeah,
Wow.
well, I suppose we'll talk quickly about the
Speaking
Razor
of the
fight.
semi-finals,
Yeah, the Razor fight is not great, but I do love that shot of them piercing Wild Things. Like,
Yeah.
that's like surgical.
oh, that's
Beautiful.
no, there is like a sickening clip where Razor comes down like a side panel pops out. Oh,
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. The one where it just slices right in the seam.
oh yeah,
And I'm like, how do you even do that?
Ian Lewis, man, Ian
But yeah.
Lewis.
And then the
He's got-
pitting,
he's
it's
got
one of
X-ray
Razor's
vision.
one of Razor's best pittings, if not the best pitting.
Yeah,
Just like
I
the-
mean,
the
no version of Wild
pirouette
Thing was gonna.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
which version of Wild Thing would have had the best chance? Series 5 feels like the one that
Genuinely,
should be the answer,
I
but
feel like
I think probably is.
I feel like it would be Series 5.
It has to be because
I mean, Series 4,
it's you're going to pierce through the disc, whereas Series 3 and 4, it's just a
Yeah.
big, it's a big flat wedge. It's just Razor's dream.
yeah, we've got there is a picture out there of a live event fight Razor had with the Series 4 Wild Thing, and Razor's got Wild Thing against a tire wall and is pushing in, so you can probably guess how that went.
Yeah, probably.
So yeah, but I don't think
Razor
Razor.
got
I
that.
don't think Wild Thing would have been able to do much against Razor in any iteration. So that fight's over, and then on to Series 6 Losers Melee, featuring Wild Thing.
One thing, well, one thing here is apparently Wild Thing took a heap of damage from Razor in the previous fight, so it enters with Panic Attack's motors, weapon mended by George Francis and Tornado's wheel. It's like an all-star Frankenstein. Oh, this loses Melee though. I think this is the saddest end to any all-star career, because alright, you've got Chaos 2 who gets battered, Hypnodisc who just gets some like ooted.
Summarily
And even-
executed. Yep.
Yeah, but Wild Thing here, it just drives
Goes out with a
into the
whimper.
pit, and then we never see it again. It's not in Extreme. It's the only Series 6 semi-finalist missing from Extreme 2 All Stars, and yeah, we never see him again. That's
Yeah.
it.
And it's such a sad way for them to go, just trying to drive over the pit and they can't make it. It's like, no, let me out. I'm still relevant. I can still fight.
Yeah, Wild Thing's disc is just like a head trying to peep above water as it just
Yeah, it
slowly
is.
sinks down. It's so funny, and it just shouldn't be.
Yeah, it is a very funny fight. But yeah,
It's because that moment felt scripted for like slapstick humor or something, like the way
Yeah.
Dan Tomkier just slams the pit button, then Wild Thing's like, "Here I come," and then it's a trapdoor. Oh dear.
Oh dear.
Perfect
I mean,
way,
even if they had, they
perfect
were-
way to retire, if you ask me, Luke.
yeah. Down into the, you know what that is? That's Cerberus's revenge. The dogs of Hades, just dragging him down to hell.
Perfect.
I mean, to be fair, if it had appeared in the All Stars in Chaos 2's place, it probably wouldn't have been. It wouldn't have been a better end there either.
It would have been a much
Well-
worse fight. But I mean,
no,
that would have
it
been
would've
Chaos
just got
2's
bullied.
retirement was being flipped out by Dan Tom Kia. That would probably almost be a better end for Chaos
Oh,
2.
that's bad as well.
Yeah, it would have just
Tom Kia-
been a fight against two robots that bullied it in Series 6 semi-finals anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, it just would have been the losers melee again, but with Razor instead of Dan Tom Kia. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I must say we're pretty good on time. So
we are.
we're pretty much done with Wild Thing. What's your favourite Wild Thing fight?
Oh boy,
It's
mean,
Demon
there's a
versus the
few.
Mule, obviously, but aside from Demon versus the Mule.
Yeah, obviously, you got to take that into account.
I want to say my favourite that isn't the Chaos 2 Wild Thing, because
Well, that too.
that feels like an obvious answer,
That's
and also
obviously
it's
second
my
to
favourite
Demon
fight, full stop.
the Mule, so the third best.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, favourite that isn't that one. It might be. I think I'm probably go either Series 5 Losers Melee or against Hypnodisc. Probably the Losers Melee.
Yeah. Outright favourite, yeah, maybe the Losers Melee as well. I mean, Series 6 Losers Melee was great as well, but maybe less so for Wild Thing's performance. But
Yeah. The only
But,
thing against
yeah.
the only thing that might make me only thing that might make me go for Hypnodisc is Series 5 Losers Melee is annoyingly compressed. But
yeah,
apart from that,
absolutely. And a very minor shout out to its first ever fight, which was quite entertaining for the time as well against Prize Fighter.
I've got to
yeah,
say,
yeah.
I've got a special place in my heart for the Cerberus fight. But
The way
I
it rolls
think-
over.
Yeah, the way it rolls over.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that shot. It's like scripted camera work. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is
but
great.
I feel like it. I want to say the 259 fight, but that doesn't feel right. I think it might be the Hypnodisc fight, but that just feels like a safe answer.
Yeah,
I'm
there
just
is
gonna,
a lot
I'm
of
just
good
going to
ones.
say Cerberus. I'm just going to say Cerberus is my second favourite after the Chaos 2 one. And what's the worst?
Oh no.
Dear oh dear.
Is it going to be Napalm? That's just off the
No,
top
I
of my
don't
head.
think so, because the Napalm pitting salvages it for me. I think it might be the Humphrey fight, which we didn't even
Oh,
discuss.
right. Okay, yeah, I think you might be right with
Oh,
that one.
no,
no,
no.
I'm try-
Deator has to be worse, surely.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Shauna Lowry ruined it. There we go.
I'll go for the Humphrey one. Yeah.
The Humphrey
Negative-
one is
negative
pretty
shot.
horrendous.
Negative shout out to the Series 6 Melee as well.
But you forget that fight was it was an essential part of the Robot Wars introduction credits.
Oh, true.
Yeah, that's right. That fight got put on the highlight reel.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm absolutely going with the celebrity special fight now.
Yeah,
No doubt in my mind.
Yeah, can't be Humphrey. Yep. Alrighty, that wraps it up.
Alrighty.
Doodle-it.
Yeah.
There you go. Alrighty, well,
Beautiful.
thank you all for joining us for the Adams Family Thing podcast, and we'll be here next week for Adams Family Values, starring Raul Julia and Angelica Houston. We're branching out. We're running out of
Oh, dear.
robots, so we're going to branch out
Yeah.
and do,
Good idea.
podcasts based on things.
Absolutely.
I do a podcast where we're hunting down the mythical beast of Bodmin.
A podcast on gravity, literally.
Podcast on the origin of the phrase "tough as nails" and whether it's caught on in
Starring
the
Tale of the Toaster.
yeah.
Oh dear.
Well, until we do all those podcasts, which are absolutely coming in the future. Until then, so long.
Au revoir.